Welcome to the TufFish Show. I am so excited to introduce to you Heather Legge. Heather, thank you so much for being on the show.
Awesome. I'm thrilled to be here. So
It's awesome. This is perfect. Well, we've been chatting ahead of this conversation, and I'm just excited to bring you to this audience. I am thrilled. So, would you please tell how'd you get into writing? Start with that.
Oh gosh, well, like many of us, many probably you, if you're listening or watching, have said earlier in life, someday I want to write a book. So I was one of those people. Someday I want to write a book. So I read a ton as a kid. I mean, I was reading advanced books and just devouring series when I was a kid, and I've just been a voracious reader my whole life. So I always enjoyed the idea of writing, but I never really did it outside of class or whatever. And so then I had my business, and I was writing blogs and recording videos and doing the things, the marketing things. And I started my business in 2006. And so 10 years later, no, almost 9 years later, in the summer of 2015, my coach and I were having a conversation about a marketing campaign. So my clientele had always been a mix of men and women, coaching for business related leadership, communication skills and such. And she said, how would it feel? What would it look like if you said, I only work with women business owners, that of with certain attributes? And I said, well, I'm kind of afraid to say that because I have a lot of men clients and I don't know. I just felt afraid, like that was my target market. So I don't know. I was dealing with some of the, what if I'm not good enough crap that we all have somewhere.
Right.
And she said, well, so as we were talking, the idea came to interview 10 women running very successful businesses on what skills and attributes it takes for women to be successful in business. So I wrote a very short series of questions, and I asked, in some cases I already knew them quite well. In some cases we were connected but didn't know each other. How about, 20-minute phone call? May I ask you a short series of questions about women's success in business? They were all thrilled to do it. So those 10 calls, each of them was a very engaging, illuminating, inspiring conversation that lasted closer to an hour. And then they said, oh, well, you should talk to so-and-so and you should talk to so-and-so. And then they all were asking me later, hey, what did those other women say? So without ever breaching confidentiality, I said, well, there are some patterns showing up. And so you and I were talking a little bit earlier, my corporate background before I started my business was a lot of data, project management and data related stuff. So I wrote the survey in a survey tool. I mean, I just wrote the questions in a survey tool because that was easy for me. And I guess it was so ingrained into me to preserve the integrity of the data in whatever project. I mean, I really didn't think this was going beyond 10 phone calls just to get a sense of what skills and behaviors it takes for women to be successful in business, so that I could validate what I was planning on for my marketing in the coming year. And this project took on, it became a life of its own. It kind of became a part-time job. So around 35 interviews or so, there were unmistakable patterns in the data. There were about 13 themes, things like focus, discipline, courage, what do we need to be successful? And while the conversations were all with women because of the initial spark of the idea, the overlap between men and women and what it takes to be successful in business is, I mean, it's almost 90 something percent, right? I mean, just we women, we have conversations a little bit differently, but what we need to be successful in business is the same. So then I thought, well, 50 is a nice round number. And I am getting to the point where I answer your question. And then I was like, well, 50. And then they just kept flooding in. People kept saying, oh, you should talk to so-and-so and you should talk to so-and-so. And so initially it was my own community. And then next thing I knew, I was talking to people in South Africa and in England and in, I don't even remember, Colombia, wherever. So most of it was concentrated in my own community, but it's sprinkled out and spread in a couple of other little communities. But the conversations and the answers were, in so many ways, there were these universal findings. And I was like, man, I have to find a way to share this with the world, because they were all so curious. They were like, well, you know, it's just a human thing. We know other people are being asked the same questions. We want to know what they said. I don't know if it's validation or what, but we're curious, right? So I thought, well, okay, so I'm going to do a series of blogs. And I was aware of this genius idea of writing blogs and then turning it into a book. And I thought, well, that could be kind of cool. Maybe, maybe whatever, but I have to put some reports together and send it to the people that I had interviewed. And then, should I go bigger? Should I expand it out? And someone said, well, you should write a book. This is so cool. You should write a book. And I said, maybe I should. I always said I wanted to write a book. I didn't imagine it would be this. I always thought it would be murder mystery fiction. Or I don't know. I never really thought about it. So next thing you know, I'm looking at the whole project as a book. So then it was published on Amazon in November of 2019. So
the title is?
The title is Lead with Moxie.
I love that name. I think that is such a fantastic name.
If it might be backwards on there.
No, it's perfect.
Lead with Moxie, surprising ways women are creating success in business. And yeah, I tend to be the face on the cover. It took me some courage, but I find myself drawn to the ones with the women's face on the cover. So I said, well, I'm here to serve. So get over the ego.
So you have said some valuable nuggets in all of this. The first off that I heard was the fact that when you initially broached this, you were looking at market research for your business. It was giving you copy, it was giving you perspective, it was also validating the idea, or is this the right direction to see what feels good in general, which is valuable, because an author, when they publish a book, they aren't just an author. They are also a business owner. They are leading in a business. And so that insight helps to figure out how do they also connect with their readers or their listeners or who they want to relate to more. So just that alone is such an incredible piece. You also talked about working with a coach, which is also so valuable, because when you're working with someone else to help you basically have a solid shortcut, it's not a shortcut that undermines or cuts away things that basically the negative side of a shortcut. It's the positive side that says, right, I can see where you need this help, and let's close this gap just a little bit faster. So you really get the results that are more substantial and that you can sustain, versus continuing to always try to figure it out yourself. But then what you also said, which I love, was that as the project grew, you followed your curiosity, you followed the enthusiasm, but you also talked about the fear, that there were some pieces of things to overcome, whether it was the video or it was getting out of your own way with the picture. So could you talk a little bit more about that? Because sometimes it's not necessarily the writing, sometimes it's the sharing, and it could be writing, especially if it's nonfiction, like who do I think I am to write this? But even if you've gotten so far to write it, now it's about sharing. And now what? So would you please talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So in my personal journey for healing and being more courageous, which I'll back up a moment. People have always, well, maybe not in childhood, but ever since I've been a working adult, people have always seen me as a confident person. And I'm assertive and confident, but there was still some stuff going on that was holding me back big time, which was it was showing up in business in certain ways and in personal. I mean, of course, but super successful in so many areas of life and business. And then there were some things that were just not happening. And the more I've learned about that, and the more I peeled back the layers and worked with the coach to get to the heart of the matter instead of beating around the bush and not going anywhere, it's like, a part of that was getting out of my comfort zone and just having that conversation with these women that I felt were kind of intimidating, but they treated me as a total equal from the word go. I mean, I had had a successful business already for 9 years, right? So that's already well beyond where most people make it. And I was in some Rotary Club, a women's executive group, networking with some of them. So they respected me a lot more than I thought they might, which said a lot about what was going on in my own head. So in case that's relevant for any of you out there, just the fact that I had the courage to do it, and I was having this interesting conversation that was relevant to them as well. They said yes, and they were so supportive from the very beginning. I didn't expect that, but that did help me keep going. But back to that, where I was when the idea for the project and the interviews came up was working on the inner stuff that had been holding me back. So rooting out the limiting beliefs. It can be a bit of a painful process, but it's so worth it. I mean, if you're thinking about working with a coach or thinking about writing as part of your own healing journey, and not necessarily, maybe it'll be a book, maybe it won't. It will lead to something, because you're taking those first, it takes the courage to do one step and then the next step and then the next step, and just to keep going. And I had some major perfectionism issues that was really the heart of most of it. So I had to learn to not be a perfectionist and to not be so hard on myself, which was an overarching theme with all these interviewees. Is we women in business are typically incredibly hard on ourselves, and that's causing us a lot of pain and suffering that we don't need to be, suffering through.
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the things, to your point about the recovering perfectionist, if you will, is that, and overcoming imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
As a developmental editor for myself, when I'm working with a client, they may not have their full book fleshed out even. So I'm working with them to just get that moving. And sometimes they're like, but Jen, I'm only a couple of chapters ahead of you. I'm like, that's all you need to be, really, to get to, because
even one.
Just be ahead of me, because
yes.
My job is to also help you bring that story out, to help you unleash that and to create it in its fullest extent. And sometimes, you might be in your own way when you're writing it, but knowing that there's somebody else who has your back, who genuinely cares and wants you to be successful, they also create that safe space to be able to do that. So what I hear you saying is that your coach and the women that you worked with help to create that, so that this book could be birthed in a way that would not just serve the immediate audience, but it would have a ripple effect and help more readers and their communities.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. So I should clarify, because I'm always working with some sort of coach. So at that time in June of 2015, when the interviews started, to the time the book was finished, I actually had worked with 3 different coaches. So for me, I'm always working with someone. I'm always working to make myself better, in various ways. So I had been working with a marketing coach for a while. And then once I knew it was going to be a book, and I was having trouble sticking to a schedule of disciplined writing on my own, and it just wasn't going anywhere. I was feeling really guilty about having said, it's going to be a book, I'm so excited. And then I had hosted some things. I had put together some worksheets. I had a podcast. I had, a lot of cool stuff happening, blogs, and I was emailing these women I had interviewed and the other people on my list about the results of the interviews. And yes, it's going to be a book. And I thought, it's not happening, so I need help. And so I hired a book coach and worked with her for 18 months to get the book going. Now, that's not a required step, but for some of you who it's just not happening on your own, it was a priceless experience. This book wouldn't exist without me working with her. I don't think it would. I mean, I maybe could have brought it to market, but I wouldn't be as proud of it. And there are several reasons why. Working with a coach, and this is, a huge benefit that people get from working with me and that I get from working with all of the coaches, is there's a regular schedule of check-ins. And so you don't want to show up to your session and be the one who didn't get your work done. So it does help you be more accountable, right? I mean, you're paying good money, you're going to probably do the work. It does not have to be perfect because you will get feedback. And in my case, the coach that I worked with, we had conversations, and so much came out of those conversations. I mean, it's not like she was just looking at my writing. She was helping me find my voice. She was helping me figure out what the book was going to be about. She was helping me stick to some kind of writing schedule. She connected me with my cover artist. She had a lot of priceless information on overcoming writer's block and how to make the decision for the publishing channel. I mean, I was so tired of waiting by the time my book was ready-ish. It was like really starting to take shape, and I knew what it was called, and I knew what the chapters were going to be, and what it was about. I didn't want to wait to go the traditional publishing route. I just didn't. I thought, man, that's going to take, at least another year, if barring some miracle, and probably years. And while in the beginning, I thought if I don't go that route and do like a big publishing house, like, it won't have as much credibility. Like I thought, I won't be as credible or whatever. That's not true. Because just the fact that I interviewed, so 111 women, by the way, 111 women, and that I have been coaching, and I have all these success stories and some things some mistakes that people that I knew, in some cases clients, and the things they did before they came to me, personal stories of triumph. All the chapters in the book ended up being 15 themes of the skills and behaviors that women require to be successful in business. So, it's already relevant to my market. And it's written with a sense of fun and realism. And I started writing, it was like super academic. So I have my master's, and the only writing I said, when we first started talking, that I had done to that point was really more academic. And my blogs had some flair, they had some personality, I guess. So my blogs had personal touches, but the book writing, I don't know what was going on in my head, but I thought it was going to be so dry, no one would have kept reading it. And so she helped me just be more myself. And so one of the tricks that we tested out, because I had hurt my wrist, and so I was having a hard time even holding a pen, and typing was painful. I did find that handwriting was absolutely the better way for me to go. The typing, no, and then I was going back and correcting and changing my mind, and I would lose a lot of the threads that had some juice. So, but one of the things that we tried was me recording audio and doing transcription, which was actually pretty painful, and I didn't like it, but it helped me find my voice, because I would just start talking about all the things I knew about whatever the theme was, like focus. I'm helping people focus every day in my work. I've become a time management guru because I had to be, because I was so terrible at it when I started my business, and I was like, holy cow, I have to get better at this or I'm going to fail. So then I have become, in my community, basically this time management expert. So I have a lot to share. So, she helped me see that. She helped me figure out how to say it in a way that was going to really connect with the women all around the world that need to hear these things. So that, oh man, it wouldn't have been birthed without her, or without all those different coaches, those conversations and relationships. So
I
yeah,
totally get that though, because so there are a few things that I'm hearing out of this too, where when for finding your voice, I definitely, I mean, for myself, even will voice record something. I also try to go back pretty quickly thereafter and make sure I have any egregious typos and actual words that are wrong to actually correct them. But I will do that because sometimes the idea hits me and I'm nowhere near a piece of paper or a pen or a computer or whatever. So
totally. Yes.
so voicing it is actually how I capture that because at least it's now something to work with versus nothing.
Exactly. And I still do that. And I was doing that in, if I had an idea for marketing or whatever. So yeah, I'd be driving around and I would capture a voice recording, and so it was captured, and then deal with it later. Yes.
I do that too.
Yes.
but
Yes.
the,
Do
but
that for your writing if it works. Absolutely.
but with nonfiction, the biggest pieces about nonfiction is that, first off, when you're writing nonfiction from the writer standpoint, you're a lot of times you're coming from a place of service and wanting to help. You're coming from a place of wanting to serve.
Yes.
And you're also wanting to provide a solution to what you could see as a problem. And it may not be, all of the possible solutions for this particular problem, but you see a spot where you can add your guidance, your input, your voice, and be a part of that solution in some way. And sometimes that transformation that happens for the reader is just their mindset. Sometimes it might be more actionable because there's steps in there that they can go and do.
Yep.
Where time management, there are some physical things that somebody can put into action and start to see and take shape with. But and also another part of that is a mindset piece of recognizing that it is possible and to start telling yourself that you can do this, because if you don't if you sit there and say I can't do that, I'm not good with that,
Yeah.
okay, fine, you're right, you can't. So
That is so true. Sometimes with a new client, they're like, I'm terrible at time management. Like, first of all, you need to stop saying that. That's the
yeah,
best thing you can do for yourself is say you're good, how great you are at time management.
and that's the case even from writing, because you need to be able to say I can do this, I can write this story, I am the best person to tell this story.
Yes.
And when it's nonfiction, and to your point about the credibility, I believe you were given that story for a reason, that you are capable of telling that story. It doesn't mean that you might not go get a form of help to augment it through research, through interviews, or through working with either a book coach or a developmental editor or both or what have you. But you get some kind of support because it will come through. And going back to what you started with by the market research, you got to know that audience. Well, this nonfiction book, this messaging inside this book is about connecting with this audience and helping this particular audience basically come through their own transformation, their own solution, so they can see themselves and they can see what's possible for them. So I love how this journey kind of was able to build upon itself, that more pieces came into play, and it not only helped your business, but it helped your book, it helped your people, and just kept evolving and growing.
Yes. Yes. And interestingly, I mean, I really was coming from a place of service the entire time. Um, but I still struggled with how how to come across and how to share the information so that it would spark that transformation, which absolutely is different for every reader. But um, so, like I said, initially, I felt like I was just going to be reporting the findings, which is part of it. That is absolutely still part. That's the backbone of the book. But all of the pieces that are people's favorites are not even about that. I mean, it's the personal stories that I put in there, and to have the courage to share those things came through conversations with people while I was going through the process. And in some cases I actually shared, sample chapters with some of the women that I had interviewed, or some other women that I really respected, and they gave me feedback. And so I was getting, bits and pieces of almost a trial and error, but that's not how I approached it. It just was, I think it was just helping strengthen my courage and confidence to keep moving forward. And it was a little bit of a litmus test. Am I on the right track? Does this feel right to me? And so sharing it with people in its rougher stages was like a test run for sharing the full-fledged book with the world, because I don't know. I don't think I could have gone from 0 to 100 or whatever. It took me time, and it all worked out the way that it was supposed to. But yeah, sharing all those bits of pieces of information with different people and trying it out. I mean, it was going to be way too dry in the beginning. And by the time I was getting close to, I didn't realize how close I was, but the day my book coach asked me, "Are you ready to turn this project into a book?" I was like, yeah. She's like, "How is it going to feel?" So we talked through, how's it going to feel? Classic coaching technique, right? When you've done this. And I was like, oh, that feels amazing. She's like, "You're more ready than you think." She's like, "You have," I don't know, I had 150-ish pages by then, probably, that were, I didn't feel like they were good enough, but they were, for that final draft, if you will, and then on to the editing piece. And so, but in the time that she asked me that, and we set a deadline for the editor. So from my first draft to my final draft that went for editing, the book doubled in size, which you probably see a lot. So it was like, I was in the zone. I was really committed to finishing it at that point, instead of, it just had become this like piece of my my weekly life, instead of a project with an end date. I never had really set that end date, which is so unusual for me, but I felt so strongly about this that it needed to be right. It needed to serve, and it was far more important to do that than to do it by a certain time. But then when it was ready, it was ready. And it was just pouring out of me at that point. Once I was in the flow, I was going. And when I sent it to her, she was like, "Wow, it really grew." And that was about a 3-week period. So when, you gotta just capture that stuff, get into it, let it just pour out of you. And it's just an amazing experience. What a growth experience. And I kind of didn't even care, once it was done and I had my book launch party and it was published and was on Amazon, and I was like, "Yay, I did it." Then it was like, "Well, are you going to sell it? Are you going to do a book tour? Are you going to do speaking?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, of course, I'll do some of that. But even if I don't sell any, I'm still so proud of this whole experience. And it helped me grow as a person. And I have zero regret. Like if I sell 0 books, I will have 0 regrets." And I mean, I had already sold some, but it was never really about that. It was about getting it out there. So they have to sell to get out there. But yeah, and then of course COVID hit, and I didn't do the book tour or the speaking circuit as planned, but that's okay. It's just still such an amazing experience. So yeah.
It's a marathon though. It doesn't necessarily, just because it wasn't done yet doesn't mean it doesn't have to be. And it might be that as more time evolves, you might have a different way of talking about the messaging inside the book, but yet it's still honoring the book. So the message that might have initially been the right thing at that would have been one message, but now it might be, maybe there's just something more going into it, or a different way to talk about it, but it's still honoring the book. It's still honoring those who it serves and the message behind it. And
Yes.
I love that. So how did you come up with Moxie, Lead With Moxie?
Well, I do address that in the book because I figured that was going to be a question. So when I was a girl, I mentioned I was just a voracious reader, and I was reading, I don't know, some adult book. And the word Moxie was used to describe the heroine in this book. I don't remember the book. I don't remember the story, but I remember the word because it really caught my attention. And it was like, she was this this kind of woman that I was like, oh, I want to be that, you know? So she had courage. She didn't hold back. She had a can-do spirit, I guess, you know, kind of that sort of approach to life. And so that word just stuck with me. And, you know, people have asked me since, well, is that your favorite word? I'm like, well, maybe if I had to pick one. But, you know, there are different words fit different things. So when I was trying to figure out what to call it, I realized it is about leadership. It is about personal leadership, even more so than it is about leading in business or, you know, being seen as a leader, leading a team. It is absolutely more about personal leadership in your quest for meeting your own expectations in life, really. And so Lead with Moxie,
I love
popped in
that.
my head, and I never looked back. And there were a lot of people. I said, I'm going to call it Lead with Moxie. And I started calling that project maybe half of those 4.5 years, halfway in. And when I mentioned it was going to be a book and that was going to be the book title, a couple of people didn't love it, but I didn't care because at that point it was like, no, this is how I'm identifying it. So I was calling it the working draft title, but it just really works. Yeah. So.
But it spoke to you, and by it speaking to you, when you're excited about something, when you're passionate about something, when you're passionate and excited and enthusiastic about this thing you've created, this book, it's easier to talk about it because your enthusiasm does that, your excitement does that. And therefore, it really never feels like you're selling that as much as you're just sharing something that you're really excited about and just happy about. So I think I love that name, actually. I love the word and I love the name because to me, it feels like there's an element of strength but yet there's an element of grace in that to me as well. So I hear that balancing act and I love that. I love that all so much. So
thank you. Yes, I agree. And it was interesting because when I first was using the word Moxie in my work, I was doing mastermind groups for years and years. And so I had a women's only mastermind group called Lead with Moxie. And so when I decided to call the project and the book the same title, it felt right because it was those same women. It was like the same things we were talking about, the same areas that they wanted to get better in, or, you know, they were great in some and not so great in others. And, just in that short amount of time that I've really been using that word in business, so let's say 8 or 9 years, it's not as uncommon as it was. I mean, when I first started using the word, people were like, what does that mean? And I feel like I'm seeing it everywhere. And I don't know if that's that fusiform gyro thing in your brain that like helps you see what you're looking for. You know, you buy a blue car, you see a bunch of blue cars, but it's really more it's partly that, I think, but it's also the word is being used more in our society. I see it in different places where I didn't used to. So I figured once I was ready to publish, I'm like, you know, they don't know what it means, and they don't, if the subtitle doesn't make any sense to them, and then whatever, I'm not gonna worry about it. This is what it is. This is who it's for. It's good. It's ready.
So Heather, where can people get Lead with Moxie and where can they connect with you?
Well, it is on Amazon, like I think I mentioned. So I did do the self-publishing Amazon route, and yeah, I would do it again. I have some ideas for the next ones, actually, series. And otherwise, Lead with Moxie, MOXIE.org, leadwithmoxie.org, or my regular business website is envisionsuccessinc.com. So Envision with an E, successinc.com. So that you can also search for Heather Legge. I'm easy to find all over the place.
Thank you so much, Heather, for being on the show. This has been so much fun.
Thank you. It's always fun to talk about these things.